Well, thank you, everybody. That was our double espresso, double video early morning shot to energize the room and also inspire you to take your seats. I hope all of you had a good dinner last night and excellent informal meetings. Delighted to open the fifth plenary session here this morning. We have two plenaries in quick succession before our 11:30 break, and then after that break we'll have a bit of a stimulating, I hope, IISS wrap-up of some of the things that we've heard and looking into the future as well. Yesterday we heard some interesting vignettes from CENTCOM Commander General Kurilla about the kinds of technologies that might make it easier, in particular, safely to patrol and prudently to interdict malign maritime traffic. It's very difficult to be in the Kingdom of Bahrain or in a Gulf Arab state without considering the issues of maritime security and global maritime choke points. It's sometimes said that for the North American Indo-Pacific tilt to be successful, it's vital to have an important presence in the Middle East, given how much energy resources flow from the Middle East to Asia. So an Indo-Pacific tilt to be successful requires a Middle Eastern presence. But precisely because of this interdependence between the Middle East and Asia, we thought it important to have a variety of perspectives on this panel. We're really honored to have, for the second year in succession, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Yemen, Dr. Ahmad Awad bin Mubarak, who will shortly make the first presentation. He'll do so in Arabic, so those of you who don't feel you have sufficient mastery of the language to listen without headphones might get your headphones ready. Followed by that, we'll have His Excellency Khalifa Almarar, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the United Arab Emirates. He too will make his remarks in Arabic, and then we'll conclude with Zaqy Mohamad, Senior Minister of State for Defense of Singapore. And as all of you know, the sister dialogue to the Manama dialogue is the IISS Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore. Party political broadcast now. The 20th anniversary of the Shangri-La dialogue will take place between the 2nd and the 4th of June in 2023, and we'd be delighted to have an important Middle East presence also at that event. So with that, and given how wonderfully settled the room is, could I invite Dr. Ahmad Awad bin Mubarak, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Yemen.
In the name of God, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to extend my thanks and appreciation to the Bahraini Minister of Foreign Affairs and the International Institute for Strategic Studies for the great organization of the works of the Manama Dialogue, to which we are keen to participate because it is a high-level and distinguished forum. We will try to talk about some of the challenges that we are facing in Yemen. Ladies and gentlemen, the importance of Yemen lies in its strategic location, which overlooks the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, the Arabian Sea, and a coastline of more than 2,400 kilometers. This site is of particular importance since it gives on the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, one of the most important straits for international navigation. Yemen's location is also of great importance to international navigation, since ships arriving and departing from and to Europe through the Suez Canal pass through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is supervised by Yemen on one of its aspects. On the 1st of the previous September of last year, the terrorist Houthi militia staged a very large military parade in the city of Hodeidah, and Hodeidah is one of the most important cities overlooking the Red Sea, and it is covered by the Stockholm Agreement. The militia exhibited models of its drones, missiles, naval mines, booby-trapped drone boats, radars, and even jamming systems. Through that provocative military display, the Houthis wanted to send two messages. The first being that the Stockholm Agreement, which the militia did not implement any of its provisions, is no longer valid. The second message is to confirm the ability of the terrorist militia to threaten international navigation in the Red Sea in a more dangerous way than previously. This was not, of course, surprising because the militia has, during the previous past years, has planted sea mines which have claimed the lives of dozens of fishermen, striking ships with suicide drone boats and naval missiles, and they carried out acts of piracy. I do not want to dwell on the details of the maritime accidents that they have perpetrated, though numerous, but you can refer to the teams of the United Nations experts on Yemen who can explain the nature of the threat posed by the Houthi militia to international navigation in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Strait, which is one of the most important strategic straits in the world. Security threats are increasing in the straits due to the militia's control over a wide band of the coastal areas and their reliance on the intelligence information provided by Iran through their spy ships. The first one was Safiz and Behshad. They were directed to the Red Sea of the Yemeni coast in July 2021 after the first spy ship was targeted by an unknown source from Hawlam. They also provided them with qualitative military capabilities, namely the drones that the militia relies on highly to perpetuate their attacks inside Yemen or even across the borders. Ladies and gentlemen, the security of the maritime straits and the safety of the international navigation are amongst the tasks of governments and state parties to the relevant international agreements and obligations. Threats posed by the non-state actors to international navigation anywhere in the world should not be tolerated. One of the strategic mistakes committed in Yemen was the pressure that was put on the government in 2018 to stop the military campaign that was about to be completed within some days to liberate the entire city and ports of Hodeidah. And allowing the Houthi militia to continue occupying the city and port has led to a catastrophic situation, the worst repercussion of which we're experiencing now. On the security side, the coastal areas controlled by the Houthi militia have become an increasingly dangerous place for the security and international navigation. Politically, the easing of military pressure on the Houthi militia and their continued control of the ports of Hodeidah stripped the peace efforts of any real pressure that could be exerted on them for them to accept the proposals and initiatives aimed at establishing peace in Yemen. On the humanitarian side, the militia's control of the port of Hodeidah helped reaching fuel crisis in the areas they control, and now they are leveraging on this to trade in the black market and thus generate huge profits for them, and they employ them in their war machine. On the other hand, we have the blackmail of the international community to pressure towards allowing the entry of oil without guaranteeing the safety of the procedures, and these procedures are used to combat money laundering practiced by the militia. Not to forget the FSO Safir, which contains more than 1 million barrels of crude oil near the shores of the city of Hodeidah. This has been held by the Houthi militia since the coup against the legitimate authority in Yemen, and they have prevented and obstructed any effort to address this issue and spare the Red Sea region the risk of a major environmental, humanitarian, and economic disaster. In this regard, we stress on the importance of the success of the UN plan to address the issue of FSO Safir, and we call for a speedy implementation of the first phase of this plan to empty the FSO that risks to explode or leak, being an imminent danger to the countries of the Red Sea region, and we would like to thank all the countries that contributed to financing this plan. Ladies and gentlemen, establishing peace in Yemen is a basic guarantee for maritime security and international freedom of navigation in this strategic strait. In this context, the Yemeni government had to make painful concessions to make the proposal of the special envoy of the Secretary General of the UN to extend and expand the truce to make it successful. And it reached the maximum of its sacrifices because it senses the pain and suffering of its citizens as a result of an unjust war imposed by the terrorist militia that is at the service of the expansionist project of the Iranian regime in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, the Houthi militia thwarted the truce and it expanded its economic war against the Yemeni people, targeting ports, oil ships with Iranian drones, which is in violation of the international humanitarian law. It is a dangerous threat to the global oil supplies and the international shipping lines, and it has the possibility of causing an environmental disaster. The continued targeting of oil installations in Yemen will have dire repercussions at all levels, namely humanitarian level, because the Houthi are deepening the humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen to blackmail the international community. This requires concrete measures against these terrorist acts and to stand firmly against the sabotaging role of Iran. We call upon all the international organizations to do their duty in this regard and to study the humanitarian and economic impacts of such attacks and to tell the world about them. The Houthi terrorist militia's practices have gone beyond being an internal rebellion or local threat. They are international now because they are targeting international ports, and they represent a real threat to the international peace and security. The world must realize that they have thwarted all incentives to reach peace. And since they are attacking the oil facilities, we have classified the Houthi as a terrorist militia in order to punish the Houthi leaders, entities, and individuals belonging to it and linked to it. And this, of course, will not have any negative repercussions on the humanitarian situation or our population that are under their control. Here, despite the fact that the terrorist Houthi militia has thwarted the efforts to extend the truce and they have escalated the military situation, they launched an economic war and they have deprived the Yemenis of exporting and importing oil derivatives. The Yemeni government did not respond to that with the same way. It went on implementing the terms of the truce because it wanted to safeguard the gains at the humanitarian level. In fact, the Houthis only represent themselves and the Iranian agenda. At the end, achieving sustainable peace in Yemen requires a realistic vision stemming from a correct understanding of the terrorist nature of the Houthis, and we need to exercise an effective pressure on it by the international community, namely classifying it as a terrorist organization, to draw its financial resources and to adhere to the three references for the solution: the Gulf Initiative and its executive mechanism, the outcomes of the Comprehensive National Dialogue Conference, and the Security Council Resolution 2216. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Foreign Minister, for that powerful statement. There'll be a number of questions, I'm sure, on how conflict resolution in Yemen can go forward in the service not only of Yemen's security, but global maritime security. With that, could I invite His Excellency, Khalifa Almarar, to take the podium. Thank you, sir.
In the name of God, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me at the outset to extend our sincere thanks to the brothers in the Kingdom of Bahrain, to the government and people of Bahrain, and to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Bahrain for the warm reception and hospitality. I also thank them for continuing to hold the Manama dialogue sessions annually without interruption, and here we are today at the 18th session. My thanks are also extended to the IISS for organizing this distinguished and important forum. I would like to thank Dr. John Chipman for inviting us to take part in this session. When it comes to the topic of this session, it is necessary to emphasize the importance of the security of waterways in the Arabian Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula, especially in the Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb Straits. Promoting the security and safety of international maritime navigation in this region is a challenge and a priority for the countries of the region. Threats to the security and safety of these waterways were never just a possibility. It was rather a reality, as witnessed by the series of incidents and attacks that occurred over a long period of time. These threats still exist at the time being. Please allow me to touch on 3 points. First, the strategic importance of the Hormuz and Bab el-Mandab Straits. Indeed, the Strait of Hormuz is the only waterway from the Arabian Gulf to the high seas, to the Arabian Sea, and then the Indian Ocean. It is the most important strategic strait in the world, through which about 25% of the world's oil consumption passes, and about a third of the world's consumption of LNG. It therefore controls the global energy security to a large extent. It is also extremely important for international trade of all countries bordering the Arabian Gulf. As for the Bab el-Mandab Strait, it is also of great international strategic importance. It is the third largest strait where international energy supplies pass after the Strait of Hormuz. Indeed, more than 6.5 million barrels a day of oil pass according to pre-COVID-19 estimates. The strait has also a strategic importance for Europe, since most of Europe's trade with Asia passes through it, in addition to all the maritime traffic to and from the Suez Canal that crosses to and from the Indian Ocean. In light of developments in the energy security at the international level, the strategic importance of these two straits increases to a large extent. Equally important is the need to secure the safety and security of maritime navigation through them. Second, there are various sources of threat to the security of maritime navigation through the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandab Strait, starting with the acts of maritime piracy, threats by international organizations and groups, and threats and hostilities resulting from escalation of tension and disputes between states, miscalculation of the parties' intentions that have to do with the security of the region. Between 2005 and 2011, increased acts of maritime piracy threatened the security of waterways in the region and disrupted international trade. Terrorist acts are still a threat to maritime navigation in and around these two straits, since the terrorist attack on the destroyer IISS Cole in the Gulf of Aden in October 2000. It was followed by the attack on 4 oil tankers off the coast of the UAE on May 12, 2019, and the subsequent attacks in June 2019, July 2021, and August 2021. In addition to the hijacking of ships and multiple maritime accidents that targeted the military vessels operating in the Persian Gulf. In the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Strait, hostile actions by the terrorist Houthi militia have posed and still pose a constant threat to the security of international maritime navigation through the use of missiles, drones, booby-trapped ships, and naval mines. The Houthi terrorist group did not hesitate to threaten international shipping lanes passing by the Bab el-Mandab Strait. It lately did so after it refused to renew the truce in Yemen, which ended on October 2, 2022. Tensions and conflicts in the Horn of Africa, especially in the countries bordering the Bab el-Mandab Strait, also pose a threat to the security of maritime navigation there. Third, the United Arab Emirates has always worked to support security and safety for maritime navigation in and around the Straits of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandab. When maritime piracy emerged, the UAE worked on supporting capacity building in Somalia and the Horn of Africa to confront piracy. It hosted also 2 international conferences in cooperation with the United Nations to mobilize support, provide financial commitments, and establish international alliances and coalitions to combat piracy in the region. The UAE adopts strict policies and measures to combat terrorist groups and organizations and to fight terrorist acts, including terrorist acts that target the security of maritime navigation in the region. In order to face threats resulting from increased tension in the region, the UAE has adopted a policy of de-escalation and has supported efforts to engage in a process of dialogue and research to guarantee the security and safety of maritime navigation with all regional and international actors that share an interest in maintaining the security and safety of trade supply chains and international energy through strategic waterways in the region. In parallel, the UAE has also supported initiatives pertaining to monitoring and preventing sources of threats to maritime security. It joined the International Maritime Security Construct initiative with the United States of America, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the United Kingdom, and Australia. The UAE hosts the European initiative, the European Maritime Awareness in the Strait of Hormuz Command Center, and it supports the various cooperation mechanisms engaged in combating terrorist acts in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. And when 4 oil tankers were under attack off the coast of the UAE in May 2019, the UAE conducted a professional international investigation of the highest standards with the participation of a large number of friendly and partner countries. It shared with the international community and the United Nations information and conclusions reached by the investigation to achieve the highest standards of transparency and responsibility. The UAE, by choosing to build bridges of communication with all countries in the region, by engaging on the path of peace, stability, and prosperity, by giving priority to diplomatic and pragmatic solutions instead of confrontation and conflict, provides a conducive environment and climate for cooperation of all parties in order to secure the security and safety of maritime navigation in the region and to serve the interests of all countries regionally and internationally. And thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for that detailed expose, and in particular for spending some time on the issue of maritime piracy, which certainly hasn't gone, and perhaps a perfect lead into our next speaker. The incidents of maritime piracy some years ago in the Malacca Straits were really quite significant until there was the sort of regional agreement to which you referred between the littoral states and the United States to share intelligence on what was taking place. So with that, could I invite the Senior Minister of State for Defense of Singapore, our friend Zaqy Mohamad, to take the podium. Thank you.
Testing, okay. Dr. John Chipman, my fellow panelists, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me thank the organizers, IISS, for inviting me to speak today at the 18th Manama Dialogue here in Bahrain, and really a big thank you to our Bahraini hosts as well for your excellent hospitality. It's a great pleasure for me and my team to be here in Bahrain. The topic, security of the global maritime choke points, is an important and timely one. I come from Singapore, a maritime hub for which seaborne trade has been our lifeblood since the 13th century. Long before we were financial, technology, or air hub in the region. For us, maritime security is more than an important topic. It is an existential one. Though my remarks will focus on the Asia-Pacific region, but I hope that you'll find some points of relevance that can be read across to this region. Today, maritime trade remains the lifeblood of Singapore's economy. The Strait of Malacca and the South China Sea form 2 of our key arterial networks. Singapore sits at the intersection of the Straits of Malacca and the South China Sea. And I'm sure many of you would know that the Straits of Malacca is the shortest route between the Middle East and East Asia. The volume of crude oil and LNG that is shipped through the Straits of Malacca each day is only second to Hormuz. It carries almost 3 times as much of global seaborne trade compared to the Suez. And yet, at its narrowest point, the Strait of Malacca is less than 3 kilometers wide, much, much narrower than the Strait of Hormuz at its narrowest point. So therefore, as you can see, maritime security in the Asia-Pacific, like in many parts of the world, has come under increasing pressure. So let me cite a few contributing factors and trends. First, the South China Sea remains a potential flashpoint, with a web of contesting sovereignty claims entangled with great power politics and military posturing. Second, some countries in the region have differing interpretations of the rules that govern the use of the sea. Some have become increasingly trenchant in asserting a restrictive interpretation of UNCLOS and what are legitimate activities in the EEZs and what are not. If unchecked, the right to freedom of navigation and overflight, which is the cornerstone of the international maritime system, will be undermined, not just in the Asia-Pacific, but around the world, and including here in the Middle East. Third, we see increased militarization. And over the past decade, military spending in the Asia-Pacific has grown by about 60%, and it shows no sign of slowing down. Geopolitical uncertainties fueled by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and great power rivalry have triggered strategic calculations in many countries in the region. The singular conclusion appears to be spend more on defense. And we can expect the waters of the Asia-Pacific region to be more crowded as countries expand their navies and coast guards. And this includes extra-regional ones deploying their assets to and through the region. And in such an environment, the risk of accidents and incidents will naturally be heightened. Even though I was talking about the Asia-Pacific region, none of what I said so far have sounded unfamiliar or unrelatable to the Persian Gulf. Many of you here have seen and continue to see your own share of contestation and conflict, including the threats of piracy and the threats of terrorism. Faced with such a daunting slate of challenges, it is sometimes tempting to succumb to fatalism, especially as small states like Singapore and as middle powers. Our former ambassador at large, Bilahari Kausikan, used to say that small states like Singapore are intrinsically irrelevant because we perform no function that cannot be done the same and better by larger states. But I would argue that being intrinsically irrelevant is not the same as being doomed to irrelevance. I think there's a big difference there. And for Singapore, it is our deep abiding belief that small states too have agency, especially when we work together with other small states and middle powers. So let me share a couple of ways in which Singapore has tried to play our part in the region. First, in shaping norms and upholding our multilateral system and rules-based international order. So much depends on the seas that we can ill afford for the law of the sea to degenerate into the law of the jungle. If you ask the Navy and the Army guys here, they'll tell you there's a big difference. We all have fundamental interests at stake in upholding the right of all countries to freedom of navigation over flight, in upholding the primacy of international law, including the 1982 UNCLOS. All countries, including and especially the small ones, therefore need to come together to ensure that our voices are heard. Our voices are louder when we speak in unison. So dialogues like the Manama dialogue and the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore are invaluable platforms to bring together countries, small states, middle powers, and superpowers alike. The world needs platforms like these to set the tone and shape consensus on what are acceptable norms in the region and allow for global discourse. And beyond dialogue, Singapore has and always will play our niche and contribute our niche capabilities within our resource limitations as a small country to uphold the international order. And this is why Singapore participated actively in the multinational Combined Task Force 151 as part of international counter-piracy efforts in the Gulf of Aden. Second is to build trust and confidence through practical cooperation. In the Asia-Pacific region, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting, or the ADMM and the ADMM Plus, are key pillars of the regional security architecture. In fact, the 9th ADMM Plus meeting will be taking place in Cambodia next week. Combined, the 18 ADMM Plus militaries, which includes the US and China, make up close to 90% of the world's military forces. So the ADMM Plus today is the premier platform for advancing practical cooperation on security and defense matters in the region. It was under the ambit of the ADMM Plus that we promulgated a code for unplanned encounters at sea, or what we call the CUEs. All 18 ADMM Plus navies have since adopted and practiced the CUEs in ADMM Plus maritime security exercises, because we all recognize that we have a common practical risk in reducing the risk of miscalculation and escalation of incidents at sea. Now, there are many examples of this focus on practical, interest-based cooperation outside of the ADMM Plus. Since 2004, when piracy and armed robbery were rampant in the Malacca Straits, the littoral states, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and Singapore came together to coordinate joint aerial and maritime patrols. And this continues till today. In 2016, after a spate of kidnappings orchestrated by militant groups in the Sulu Sea region, the huge expanse of waters that border the southern Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia, the three countries forged a similar arrangement called the Trilateral Cooperative Agreement. As a small state, Singapore believes that we can play our part to foster peace and stability by facilitating more of such cooperation. And to this end, our Singapore Navy hosts the Information Fusion Center, a regional maritime security center that shares actionable information amongst regional and international navies, coast guards, and maritime agencies. And earlier in September this year, we officially opened the Multilateral Counter-Terrorism Information Facility, or CTIF, bringing together partner nations to share intelligence on terrorism and provide early warning in the region, including terrorism threats in the area. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude. These are turbulent times indeed, with an increasing fractious geopolitical landscape. Multilateralism and the international rules-based order is under threat. Amidst the great power rivalry that we see around us, small states and middle powers are not without agency. We can all step up and fill in the gaps that have emerged in this more divided geopolitical environment. Multilateralism allows small and medium-sized states to have a voice and to secure open lines of communication and freedom of navigation. Now, how countries react to and manage challenges to multilateralism and the rules-based order will affect regional stability and the international environment that we all depend on to prosper and grow. And I believe that small states, especially when working hand in hand with middle powers, are well placed to advance key principles to chart a positive multilateral agenda based on practical cooperation. Thank you very much.
Zaqy, Mohamad, thank you very much for those remarks and explaining some of the practices in your region that might have, as it were, a read-over into this one, in particular for noting the trilateral cooperation between three ASEAN states, Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia, to deal with the specific challenges in the Sulu Sea, and it would be interesting to discuss whether something similar might be devised in this region for the same goal of practical cooperation. So with that, we'll turn to a discussion from the floor. Remember the two-step solution, which is put your badge into the microphone, press the speak button, it turns green, but you won't be speaking until I turn it red. And could I ask to kick us off the IISS Asia Director in Singapore, James Crabtree.
Thank you, John. I wanted to ask all of the panelists a question about the role of minilateral groupings in maritime security, specifically the two Quad groupings. So the now called I2U2 Quad grouping of Israel, India, the United Arab Emirates, and the US, in its initial foreign ministers meeting in 2021, highlighted maritime security as a potential focus of that body, although there hasn't been much subsequent to that. So I wondered perhaps particularly our guests from the UAE, but also from Yemen, if they might comment on the role that that body could play in maritime security. And for Minister Zaqy from Singapore, a related question on the other Quad, the Asian Quad. At the Quad Leaders Summit this year in Japan, the 4 countries launched the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative, which Singapore is a partner of sorts of because of the work of the Information Fusion Center in Singapore, which you mentioned. I wonder if you could comment on, both from Singapore and potentially from ASEAN's perspective, whether you feel there is more that the Quad as a grouping could do to promote maritime security in Asia and beyond.
Super, thank you very much. Someone who wrote something recently on this subject, Veera Solanki.
Thank you, thank you, John. Separate question. The one regional maritime security body that all 3 countries represented here are part of is the Indian Ocean Rim Association, and Singapore and the United Arab Emirates are also member states of the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. How best to ensure that these 2 main regional security architecture bodies are effective in addressing the challenges faced on maritime security, both in the Pacific and in the Western Indian Ocean and Central Indian Ocean as well? Thank you.
Thank you. And from France, Emile Hokaim.
Thank you very much. Historically, the Navy has been the least loved, least resourced branch of the armed forces in the Gulf region. At a time like this, where maritime security is of great importance to their security, but also to global trade, do we see a movement towards greater investment in those capabilities? In particular, the UAE, which has emerged as a powerful military nation, is that one concern that the leadership there and other GCC leaderships are taking seriously? Thank you very much.
And from the US, Basima Halawi-Rowe.
Thank you, John. My question is to Dr. Ahmad Awad, and I will ask it in Arabic. Dr. Ahmad,
the Houthi militias have become very dangerous for Yemen and the Arab region. And despite the terrorist acts that you have mentioned in your speech, acts that are affecting the security, the maritime security, we still see that the Western countries are reluctant to consider the Houthi militia as a terrorist group. You said in your speech that it is important to exert pressure. My question is the following. How can the Gulf countries contribute in exerting pressure on the Arab and international communities so that the Houthis can be classified as a terrorist organization?
Thank you very much. Robert Ward.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the panel. A question for Senior Minister Zaqy. Japan is about to revise its national security strategy for the first time in nearly 10 years. And is rethinking its security policy in ways that would have been unthinkable even a few years ago. Given Japan's status as an important maritime power in Asia, if you had a magic pen, what would be at the top of your wish list in terms of how Tokyo could further enhance its contribution to maritime security in the Indo-Pacific? Thank you.
And from the US, David DeRoche.
For the panelists, I was just wondering, yesterday, the senior U.S. military officer in the region was effusive about the promise of unmanned surface vehicles for mapping and controlling maritime areas. Do you have criteria for how close to your shores you consider unmanned vehicles to be impinging on your sovereignty, or criteria for intercepting them as you deem them to be threats to international shipping lanes?
Excellent. I'll give one more question to the floor, come back to the panel in the order in which they originally spoke, so you can begin preparing yourselves, and then we'll have time for another short round afterwards. Bastian Giegerick.
Thank you, John. I wanted to invite the panel to comment on China's role in regional stability and maritime security questions. There's obviously an economic footprint, but there's also a military footprint with China's support base in Djibouti expanding to host the capital ships of the, or at least potentially host the capital ships of the PLA Navy. So I wonder whether we can have views on China's role in these wider questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Dr. Ahmad, can we start with you?
Just I will respond to Basma questions, about, and she asked me in Arabic.
At the time being, there is an Arab decision to consider the Houthi militia as a terrorist group. The League of Arab States at the delegate level took a decision. The ministers of interior also took the same decision. There was also a previous decision by the US administration, the previous US administration, to consider the Houthis as a terrorist group. However, they step back from it. I believe that because of humanitarian concerns, I think that this is a very important issue. The Gulf states can play a major role in this regard. And I think that during the last security meeting of the GCC, the KSA asked for the Houthis to be classified as a terrorist group. And on many occasions, efforts have been exerted to do the same. So the same issue is being highlighted again and again. I think that when it comes to the international community, we need to adopt a new approach. Lately, when dealing with the Yemeni issue, the Western countries were only relying on the humanitarian dimension and not on the other aspects. So this has led to aggravating the humanitarian situation for the last 8 years. And in my speech, I mentioned Stockholm and Hodeidah. So if we look at how the humanitarian situation was in Hodeidah before 2018, and if we look at the humanitarian situation after the Stockholm agreement, for years after the Stockholm agreement, we will see that the situation has been aggravating. So this approach that only tackles the humanitarian dimension is in fact leading to more problems in Yemen and is aggravating the situation in Yemen. We need to exert lots of pressure, and I believe that the world has learned a lot from what is happening in Ukraine. And in the opening address, the President of the European Commission mentioned this issue, and she said specifically the use of Yemen as a platform to threaten the region by using the Iranian drones that are being given to the Houthis. So the image is becoming clearer. We need to adopt a new approach, taking into account the new geopolitics in the region. But we believe that without exerting real pressure from the international community, from going beyond the humanitarian dimension, nothing can be done. So we need to establish a link between what is happening in Yemen and what is happening in Iran. The Houthis, was it not for the pressure on the Iranian regime, we would have seen, in fact, some development in the Yemeni file. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anything you wanted to say from your own perspective about how you might welcome the procurement of greater naval capabilities by some of the other Gulf Arab states to develop maybe even more of a, as it were, indigenous capability to patrol the waters of the region?
Well, we welcome all the initiatives by our, either by our Saudi, our Gulf brothers and all the other initiatives, and we are part of all these initiatives, and we are supporting, because of the war, our institutional capacity, especially in the, safeguards and the maritime capacity, is not that, strong that we will be able alone to play, a crucial role in protecting our borders or our seaports. So, in coordination and cooperation with our friends and allies, we are working together. So we welcome this. But taking consideration the internal challenges that we have, maybe we're not able to play a crucial role in this kind of initiatives.
Thank you very much, Khalifa Almarar.
Well, first I would like to say that the threats to maritime security is just one aspect, one manifestations of the conflict, increased tension in the region, conflict in the region within states, between states, and in that regard, it has to be addressed in more overall settings. And in all groupings, whether it's I2U2 or the Indian Ocean Rim Organization and other groupings, the maritime security is one aspect of cooperation among. This is the multilateral cooperation in this respect. And it goes without saying, of course, that the countries of the region are investing in this aspect, whether in software or hardware to contribute to the security of the region, including, of course, maritime security. I'm not a military expert in that, to go into that details, but this is obvious, and people who witness all the events here and the exhibitions, military and security also exhibition, would see that the countries in the region are investing, and they are maritime security is of a priority for them, and they are investing in that capacity. But in this regard, I would say, since the UVAs and unmanned vehicles has been mentioned, and in view of what has been even discussed here through starting with Her Excellency von der Leyen and the military panel who expressed that, I think it is time to think of some international rules, agreed rules to regulate or to address this unregulated use of UVAs. And this is, I think, is an important issue, and it is time to actually to have some internationally agreed legal base to look into this threat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We at the IISS have been persistent advocates for legal diplomacy to continue to modernize the principles and norms of international law to make them relevant to the emerging and different threats to the international order since, Hugo Grotius began speaking about international law some centuries ago. We often are very alert to the need to revise our domestic laws to deal with different forms of a social or domestic compact, but the speed at which we modernize international law is perhaps a bit behind the geostrategic movements that are taking place internationally. So I thank you for the endorsement of the principle implicitly of legal diplomacy to that end. Zaqy Mohamad, you had quite a lot of questions, so I'll give you a few minutes to comprehensively to answer those, if you like. Go ahead.
From a region far, far away.
Exactly.
Okay, so we had good questions from James, and as well as Viraj on the multilateral and multilateral security arrangements that you find around, just the Quad, AUKUS, and so forth. I think from Singapore's perspective, we welcome multilateral agreements because I think to some extent, as I shared, practical cooperation is certainly one way in which we can go above and beyond areas of contestations, areas of disagreements, and so forth. So if I look at the Sulu situation, for example, between Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines, it was raised last year by Minister Prabowo when he was here as a keynote speaker as well, that countries can rise above conflicts over EEZs or sovereignty and move into practical cooperation and build understanding. And that's what we want in any regional security architecture. So whether it's Quad or AUKUS, I think it's important that we also welcome such multilaterals or multilaterals to cooperate with us. And now one area in which I spoke earlier, such as the IFC or the Information Fusion Center, in which we cooperate with many countries in the areas of maritime security and put in place intelligence systems, networks, as well as security intel, in which we want to help secure the maritime straits maritime channels. I think it's important that we give countries advance notice and allow for information sharing with trust to tackle specific areas such as maritime piracy, maritime terrorism. So these are areas in which I think countries can work together closely. However, on Quad, I think someone was asking that question earlier as well. We appreciate their efforts, and while some may see little movement on the defense or security aspect, but we also see benefits from what they've provided so far with regards to vaccine distribution as well as their moves on climate change. So there are certain strategic interests that multilaterals like these can provide into the region beyond just security considerations. So I wouldn't discount the fact that there is progress, but there are also different architectures to deal with different sorts of issues or concerns that we deal with. On the broad thrust on Japan's expansion in terms of the change in national security policy, I think we'd like to welcome them and continually engage them through the ADMM Plus because as I shared, this platform already includes the US and China, many of our ASEAN countries in which we do joint exercises. I think this is good for confidence building, capacity building, and as navies and militaries sort of understand each other better, come up with forms of protocols in the sea or in the straits as well as in the air, where you want to minimize the risk of escalation or incidents. I think this is one area in which we can do our bits in terms of stabilizing the region. So, sense is not exclusive. It's not about exclusive unilaterals or multilaterals, but I think it's about bringing together countries of like minds and trying to achieve a common goal of stability and security.
Super, thank you very much. So we will go back for about 6 or 7 interventions on the floor, and then I'll give 2 minutes each to our panelists to close by about 10:14. Could I start from Yemen with Zaqy Aziz?
I would like to thank Bahrain for its hospitality and warm welcome. I would like also to thank Mr. John for inviting us and for managing the various sessions. The threats to maritime choke points have been preceded by lots of threats to the Yemeni population. The Houthi militia, supported by Iran, is harming the Yemeni population. The Yemeni population is being killed, and some countries haven't yet seen and felt the suffering. I would like to thank the Arab coalition headed by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, for standing with the people of Yemen and its military that is defending the freedom and dignity of Yemenis. The Houthi militia is threatening maritime navigation with the direct support of Iran, and this threat is going to become a threat for everyone. Is it possible to come up with support to the Defense Council of the Yemeni that supports or that considers the Houthi as a terrorist group, and by supporting the Yemeni military to fight this group?
Thank you so much. And from the Netherlands, Maya Nowens.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the speakers as well. I'd like to ask Mr. Zaqy about CUES, which was the Code for Unplanned Encounters at Sea, which was agreed in 2014. Do you think that, considering the heightened tensions and the proliferation of capabilities in the Indo-Pacific, that this requires updating? And if you could update it, how would you do so? Unless I missed it for the other panelists as well, I wondered whether you could come back to the question on China in the region as well, as I'd be interested to hear your view on that. Thank you.
Thank you for pressing that point again. From the US, but also IISS Asia, Aaron Connolly.
Thank you, John. SMS Zaqy, I wanted to ask you about the MV Yangyang, the supertanker that ran aground in the Malacca Strait last month while heading to Indonesia's Nipa anchorage, a well-known ship-to-ship transfer hub. It was carrying sanctioned Venezuelan oil at the time, but it was originally sanctioned by the United States for carrying Iranian oil. How much of a risk to navigation are these sanctioned supertanker shipping networks? Was this a one-off, or is this a bigger challenge? And what more can be done to discourage countries from hosting these ship-to-ship transfer hubs? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from France, Kevin Thivon.
Thank you very much. My question goes to His Excellency Khalifa Almarar, and is about the policy of de-escalation you mentioned earlier, and your ambition to expand your maritime reach in the region. So what is the rationale behind your dismantlement of the base of IISS in Eritrea and the abandonment of your intent to have a military presence in Berbera, Somalia? Thank you very much.
And from Germany, Kurt Lauk.
Thank you, John. If I'm not mistaken, none of the speakers mentioned the possible contribution of Europe to safety, maritime safety. What do you think could be the contribution of Europe for maritime safety? Or has Europe become relatively irrelevant in that area? Although it is a lifeline, the Strait of Hormuz is a lifeline for gas and oil for all of Europe.
Thank you very much. And from Italy and also the IISS, Ben Petrini.
Thank you, John. On Friday evening, here on the margins of the Manama Dialogue, our team launched a publication, the Armed Conflict Survey 2022. Now, one of the main findings is that the civil wars have become increasingly more and more internationalized. Yemen fits squarely in this category. It's obviously a civil war, but it has a wider regional implications. So my question is, to what extent the panelists assess the risk of an escalation of this conflict wider in the region? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dana Allen.
Thank you, John. To Senior Minister Zaqy Mohamad, I was interested in your theme about on the agency of small states, and I wonder if you could say something further on how this agency is either diminished or enhanced by competition, conflict between great powers, and pressure to choose sides.
Thank you very much. There's, I think, a celebrated phrase in the region, we don't like to choose sides, but we will take a position. So that's a subtle nuance of diplomatic language that one sometimes sees expressed. And we'll close the questions, at least, with Tom Beckett.
Thank you, John. For Foreign Minister Mubarak, there are estimates that if the FSO SAFER were to disintegrate, at the best case, it would be the same scale as the Exxon Valdez, and at the worst case, it would affect the whole of the Red Sea. And the impact on, for example, Saudi's goal to increase the tourism destinations in the Red Sea would be impacted. Are you satisfied that there's enough international attention on that platform, that there is a plan to deal with it, and the wherewithal and intent to execute the plan?
Thank you very much. So we'll go back to the panel in the order in which they spoke. So, Dr. Ahmad, I don't know whether you want to begin with the SAFR question and then move on to China and one or two other points. Dr. Ahmad?
Well, I mean, are we satisfied with the efforts made by the international community regarding SAFR? Simply no. I mean, recently, just the last 2 years, we start noticing somehow more focusing on SAFR issues. This issue is not new. Before that, there were also an international UN plan through UNOPS, one of the UN agencies, and it consumed a lot of resources, time, more than 3 years. Then we reached deadlock when Houthis changed their mind and everything stopped. We own the vessels, the oil, everything. But our position since the beginning was that we don't want to politicize these issues. This is a pure humanitarian potential risk that will cost Yemen directly more than $20 billion. That will affect our planet. So we said any initiatives will resolve this problem and get rid of this potential, we will support that. Now we have more detailed plan. We have $92 million, for the implementation. Yet it depends on the Houthis' response at the last moment. We experienced that before. This time we will support any international initiatives, and again, I thank all the countries that supported and donated to this plan. But Houthis keep using Safar as a hostage, as a bargaining chip to get more and more. So hopefully this time we can see execution for the plan, but without keeping this on the radar and increase the pressure. I'm afraid that we will go to square zero again. This is my take on the Safar issues. In general, I can notice that you all reach fatigue stage about Yemen. Yemen always is just about the suffering, the catastrophe, and look to Yemen just as internal issues. Houthis as internal group, they have their own demands and something, and this is wrong. This is wrong. Houthis just endorsed just a week ago what they called the Employment Code of Conduct, enforcing all the public servant in Yemen to pay to their ideology. So if you are not paying to the Houthis, extremist ideology, you will be subject to fire from the job, which means tens of thousands of Yemenis will be another, militia. And people are still just talking the salary issues, just dealing with the issue in Yemen just from humanitarian perspective, humanitarian angle, without adopting a new approach by the International Committee, and also knowing the strong ties between Houthis and Iran and how they are serving their agenda. I'm afraid that we will not see let go solution in Yemen very soon. Thank you.
Go ahead. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Well, I would start by saying that the maritime security in the region is of great interest, and not only to the littoral states in the region, but it is, I think, a legitimate interest for maritime powers and for the international community at large. And also the concern about the maritime security in the region is a legitimate concern for the whole international community. Saying that, a contribution to maritime security on one side, and the contribution to solving conflicts and problems in the region as a whole is of interest to the all parties, all countries. And I think building a larger and more close cooperation in this regard is needed from all countries and all concerned parties. On the other side, the United Arab Emirates is contributing to the peace, to the stability, to the security of the region, and also contributing to fighting terrorism and fighting all threats whether to the maritime navigation or other forms of terrorist threats and extremism. And wherever we can contribute positively in this regard, whether it's in Somalia or elsewhere, I think we do our share in this, and we do our share in this in cooperation and in coordination with all like-minded countries and those who want also to see a more stable region, whether it's in the Horn of Africa or in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to help the IISS Senior Fellow for China, Maya Nowens, understand the role of China in Djibouti? A thought about China's role in Djibouti and how China might contribute to maritime security in this region?
Well, I think our relation with China is our strategic economic and trade partner, and whatever China would contribute positively to the stabilization of the region, what contribute positively in the region, I think in that regard it will come. But I'm not an expert on the military side, whether what to comment on any specific issue in this regard.
Thank you very much. Zaqy Mohamad, a lot of questions again to you, including a very particular one on ship-to-ship transfers. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Now I'll start with the topic that I started with, the theme of small countries and middle powers. Because honestly, I think in Singapore we are quite, when no illusions that when the big powers shake, we are just price takers. Honestly, I think there's very little you can do as one country. I think that's the honest truth. The U.S., for example, if you look at the Asia Pacific region, is our largest investment partner. China, on the other hand, being part of the region too, is our largest trading partner. So how do you choose? So to some extent, it's not about not taking choice or positions, but it's really about taking principled stands. And how do you bring countries together? Because small states, one on our own, you have very little agency or voice. But as a bloc, when you use platforms like ADMM or ASEAN, or other platforms like the UN, for example, you do have a bigger say, a bigger voice to put points across. So if you think about, when Singapore took a principled position on the Ukraine-Russia conflict and imposed sanctions, I think that's a principal point, not because we took sides, but because large states should not should not impede on the sovereignty of smaller states. I think that was quite clear. And we, being a smaller state too, needed to put that position and point across. And therefore, you have to use platforms. You have to use, collaboration, cooperations with middle powers and large powers to bring them together, as I've shared with about ADMM+. So that leads to the second question on the code for unplanned encounters. And that's something that we continue to work on, because that's something for us to work proactively, because these are practical cooperations, again, where you have exercises, maritime exercises in the straits in the South China Sea, to get the navies of even your superpowers, your middle powers, and all that in Asia to be familiar with each other, to understand what the code of practices, code of conducts are. So to the question of whether there'll be reviews, yes, there are. But in fact, I just want to say this, that there is a review being planned, and to introduce one for the code of conduct for Southeast Asia, for the South China Sea. I think this is something that's being developed. So give it time, and I think the countries will develop one for the South China Sea as well. So these are areas in which ADMM, ADMM+ have got values as platforms, where small middle powers and as well as superpowers can come together to come to an understanding. And really, it's about practice, because the more you practice and work together, I think it gets better over time, and you reduce that risk of misunderstanding and miscalculation. On the last point on the supertanker, I don't have a view on that, because that's not exactly defense per se, but it's more international customs. But in short, I think it's not everything that comes through the strait comes through us as well. So it's very hard to say what's illegal and what's not. But I think what's clear is this: I mean, if there's contravention of international conventions or agreements, I think we have to enforce that. So I think that's as far as I can say.
Well, thank you very much. Let me, as I did almost 23 hours and 30 minutes ago, ask you to do two things in this order. First, please stay in this room, because we'll start the next plenary in 2 or 3 minutes as soon as we have made the aménagement of the stage here and rebadged people according to their proper identities. And secondly, please give a very warm vote of thanks for the excellent panel we had this morning from these three speakers. Thank you.